Hi, welcome to the Tree.Church Bible Study, a podcast dedicated to exploring the depths of Scripture in a relatable and understandable way. I am Kelsey Bull. I'm the Associate Director of Young Adult Ministry here at the Tree.Church, and I'm so glad you are with us for today's conversation. I want to introduce our guest today. We have Mick Harper, our Director of Missions and Property, and Chris Reed, one of our Associate Pastors and Director of Biblical Education. And our silent partner, as always, is our producer. He's great, Alex McAdam. Woo. We're so glad he's with us. And today we're going to be continuing our study of and conversation through the book of Ecclesiastes. But before we get into that, I want to get to know our guests a little bit better. I have the privilege of working with them most days of the week, and they have become very good friends of mine. And so there's been a question in my mind for me personally over, I would say maybe the last month. And I don't know if you guys will get where this question is coming from, but I'm going to kick it to you before I share. If you and your wives could be best friends with a celebrity couple, who would it be and why?
Oh, man.
Which one of you have an answer right off the bat?
I have an answer.
All right, let's hear it, Mick.
Who it is not is Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Okay.
So we'll rule them out right to start.
Okay.
I was thinking about this. I'm really not into celebrities, so I didn't know many. I was like, man, who is it that I could actually go and hang out with, feel comfortable around, and have a good time? And I was drawing a blank, and then I was like, I think it's got to be one of the Robertsons. I'm going Duck Dynasty.
Okay.
I'm thinking Willie and Corey. We could have a good time. I feel like Molly could maybe relate on the side with them. They're a little bit into maybe I don't know. They're not so much rednecks as the guys are, but I think I could go out hunting with them. I could hang out with them. They're always up for a laugh, so I'm going that way.
I love that pairing.
That's awesome.
Love it.
I like it. Oh man, I don't know. The only couple I could think of was just because we've been having a conversation about it. I like people that are down to the earth and just kind of easygoing, and so anybody that I would say is that way, just like normal human being.
Sure.
I can do that. I'm gonna go actually older though. I'm gonna say not alive anymore, and I'm gonna go. I would have loved to hang out with C.S. Lewis and his wife. So
what's her name?
Joy Davidman.
Oh,
Gresham.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
great.
They got married late in life, but I would have liked to hang out with them. So,
that'd be so interesting.
Yeah.
That'd be really interesting. Those are great answers. No one who knows me will be shocked to know that at this point in time, I would pick Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. I want to know what their relationship is like. I do, in a weird way, view both of them as somewhat down to earth, but they both have astronomical fame. So I don't know how really down to earth they are.
Yeah.
But I will say something that I truly love about both of them is they seem to love their families and have incredible relationships with their families. And I gotta say, I think that would have to keep you somewhat grounded.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can't imagine their lifestyle, and that's also why I would choose them.
Is Josh gonna be on board with this? You guys being best friends with them?
I think he would.
Okay.
I think he would. I think that Travis comes across as having a pretty goofy personality, and not a lot of people see that side of Josh, but he has a pretty goofy personality. I think him and Taylor would connect in their musical interests. I mean, I love Josh, but he's in no way, shape, or form close to her talent level. But he's great. He's skilled. I think it might depend on your taste, but yeah, I think he would be down with this. I don't think it's the couple he would have picked to be best friends with, but I don't think he would be anti this.
Yeah.
So
I was gonna say, if I had to pick for Cassie, I think she would have said
Taylor and Travis.
Yeah.
I love Cass.
She listens to Travis and his brother's podcast. Yeah, she likes that podcast.
They're hilarious.
Yeah.
They're funny. And I think that's such a fun element of friendship, is when you can laugh and not take life too seriously, which
Have you seen the documentary of the brother?
I sure have.
Yes. The part that would draw me to somebody like that is the dude is looking for his Super Bowl ring in a junk drawer somewhere.
Yes.
I'm like, you don't get much more down to earth than that. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's like,
Honestly, Jason Kelsey and Kylie, his wife, would maybe even be a better, more realistic pick. Maybe they're more down to earth. But, and they have 3 kids, so our kids could play. I don't know.
yeah.
It's fun to think about. Second question. This week was Halloween, which we have 2 young kids, so we did the whole trick or treat thing. What was your favorite candy to get trick or treating, if you went trick or treating when you were young? Did you go trick or treating, Mick?
I absolutely did.
Oh, love this.
It was the most affordable way to get candy.
Oh,
right?
yes.
So my answer, I was thinking through this, and I was like leaning a little bit, like I was like Crunch Bar maybe, and then I was like, you know, very interesting choices, and then I was like, you know what? It wasn't any of those. It was anything full size. Like I was not thin. I was a bit of a chunker. And so anything full size was good.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. It could be Snickers. It could be anything as long as it was full size. And that was my favorite candy.
I love that. That's funny. It's a great answer.
I concur. Like, I'm not agreeing just to agree. Like, that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, the houses that gave away the full-size candy bars were always the best. And typically, if it was Snickers or Butterfinger, those would top my list.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah,
We
anybody
kept
with...
track of those houses, and we would we would hit those up first because we were afraid that they would run out.
Mm-hmm.
So the next year,
Smart move.
and we were never like, we were always when we would dress up, it was always like bibs and a straw hat that we dug up from my grandpa. We'd stuff a pillow down the front. That was our costume every year.
You were a farmer? What were you supposed
We
to be?
were
Your
whoever
grandpa.
wears bibs and has the pillow stuffed down the front of it.
Okay.
You just look goofy and dressed up as something, and then you went out
Sure.
and got candy. We didn't do. I can't remember ever purchasing a costume. We just went with whatever we had in the closet. We
That's even
turn it
better.
into something.
My mom made me a He-Man costume one year. You guys remember He-Man?
No, I don't know what you're saying.
You might be...
I don't know that I know
Oh,
who
man.
He-Man is either.
So He-Man was this, like... It's weird. It's a weird character. I've watched
Okay.
some stuff after, like, now, and I'm like, this is the strangest cartoon ever.
I was going to say, it's a cartoon.
It's like space with like Viking stuff, and guy was just big muscles, and like think Conan and the Barbarian, like think that way, like that's what he was
okay.
like. So my mom made this muscle shirt, like to make it look like I had muscles, out of pantyhose and stuff like cotton in it. And so like I had this suit, and I had the emblem, and he had a sword, and yeah.
Did you wear it once or several times?
I wore it multiple times because I
Okay.
love that costume. So
I think it was
awesome.
Molly that her mom dressed her up as a bag of trash once.
Oh.
So she put on a trash bag, and then like they stuffed it full of paper, and that's what she wore. She was a bag of trash. I was like, what a
I feel like that lands you in
that's
counseling
pretty,
later.
That's pretty cheap.
Yes, I'm so confused.
That's the way to go, though.
Did Molly want to do that?
I don't know.
That's
I don't
so
remember
funny.
the full premise of the story, and I could have it completely wrong, but
That's so funny. When I was a child, I haven't had one of these candies in a long time, and that's kind of makes me sad because I love them. But Baby Ruth was my favorite.
Oh, Baby Ruth's good.
Yeah, and I don't know what happened to those. I'm assuming they're still around, but
yeah.
They are.
yeah.
I'll be honest. It's like a less good Snickers to me.
Okay.
But
Fair.
I don't want to.
No.
Isn't it just a chocolate covered payday?
Yeah.
What's in a payday?
Payday is peanut butter and caramel and peanuts. Actually, it's not peanut butter. It's caramel and peanuts.
Caramel, peanuts.
Oh, then what? Yeah, what's the difference?
And then I think it's covered in chocolate, a Baby
Yeah.
Ruth is. And a payday
Oh,
has the nuts on the
no?
outside.
Oh, no chocolate in a payday.
Paydays are amazing.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then
no
yeah, it
chocolate in
sounds
Payday.
like the
I can
same
promise
thing.
you that because I ate 12
Yeah.
of them a few days ago.
12 of them.
Not really, but
12 full-size ones?
no.
Okay. Got it.
I forget where I was last where I had those, but somebody had like the mini ones, and I swear I ate like 7 or 8 of them. I was like, I love Payday. I like candy, period. But
Yeah.
I do too. I love candy. Right now, my kids went trick-or-treating. Lucy went 3 times. Wade went twice. And I think from all of them, like each time they went, we have like a gallon-sized Ziploc bag of candy. So we have 5 gallon-sized Ziploc bags of candy
We've
right
got
now.
no candy.
Would you like me to change that?
I wouldn't mind.
All right. Love it. Guys, thanks so much for sharing. We're going to dive into our conversation on Ecclesiastes. And just a little bit of a reminder is Ecclesiastes, this book, is about creating tension for the reader, for us, in hopes of encouraging us to reflect. And this passage today that we're going to be in is going to do just that. I hope that we'll go into today's passage considering what we invest in and why we put our hope in the things we put our hope in. And I hope that it leads us to a better, wiser place at the end of our conversation.
Very cool.
So we're going to start today in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 8. And it says this: "Don't be surprised if you see a poor person being oppressed by the powerful, and if justice is being miscarried throughout the land. For every official is under orders from higher up, and matters of justice get lost in red tape and bureaucracy. Even the king milks the land for his own profit. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth, except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? People who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much, but the rich seldom get a good night's sleep." There's a lot packed into just these beginning few verses. Mick, what similarities do you see from this text to our society today?
Well, as I was kind of thinking through the text, I mean, it obviously is centered around money, and I know we're coming through the Holy series, and we've been addressing money and contentment, and I think that this is something that in today's society that's constantly being thrown in front of us, like as a way that our success is measured, and a way that that completes us as far as happiness. We see that through our social media, through the amount of ads that we consume. So I think that a lot of that stuff carries over. And I know we're going to get into some of the other verses, but even from a business standpoint, so that is originally what my degree's is in business management and marketing. And even during that time, and I went to a Christian college, but as I'm going through that, there's a lot that's ingrained in you about how to operate a business, how to maximize profits, how to get the most out of your people and out of your resources. Which, you can look at that in positive and negative ways. Obviously, you don't want to be a sluggard and have a business full of sluggards, but the same token, like how much can you get out of people is constantly ingrained in us. How much can you produce? And that is where a lot of the value comes in. And I think this verse addresses a lot of those things really well.
Yeah, I think so too. Chris, what would you add to that?
I would say the whole idea of like wealth driving us to a place of seeking it to an unhealthy degree, if that makes sense. So like he starts off with this: don't be surprised that the poor are oppressed. Don't be surprised that the powerful exercise injustice. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That the king milks the land for its own profit. Like don't be surprised by the fact that human beings have found in money something in which they value above everything else. Like and I was just thinking about this as Mick was saying this, like, let's just say that paper money or gold or whatever it is, say that goes away. Whatever becomes that valued thing will be what replaces it. You know what I mean? And our hearts will pursue after that. And so, like, all of these resources that the king takes, and the reality is, like, that doesn't go away. We still fight injustice. We still are challenged with the care for the poor. And I think even in my own personal life, thinking about it, like, the hardest thing to do is to give something away of what you worked hard to earn. You know what I mean? And so, like, I think where he's going with it, and the fact that it doesn't give us what we hope for in the end, should make us reflect on, or should challenge that the beginning part of this verse, where he's like, we think that greed and we think that having all these things is going to bring us life, and it doesn't. So
yeah, it's interesting to me, the frustrations and tensions that were pointed out in scripture so long ago are still the frustrations and tensions we have today, and makes me so appreciate the Bible, and is such a reminder of like why we need to be in it and studying it. And really, that leads me to the next question of when and how do you see yourself or the people around you buy into that lie that wealth brings true happiness? Chris?
I'll I will point to myself, so I'll not throw anybody else out of the boat. As I look at my own life, the way that I buy into that is there's always this level of comfort that I feel when the bank account is full.
Yep.
And I can tell myself 1,000 times, God is my provider. God is the one who takes care of us. There's just always a different sense of feeling that I have whenever the bank account is full. And so it's like, yes, I say, like, God provides for me, and he does. Like, you know what I mean? So, like, I truly do believe that. I just wish I could get rid of that sense of, like, things are okay now that we're at this level. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, like, to me, that is an indication of my heart of, like, maybe I do esteem money more than what I even think that I do. You know what I mean? And so that's typically my check, and typically what I'm praying through and how I see it play out for me is, like, I feel comfortable. I feel like life is going well whenever the bank account's full, and when it's not, like, it's tense and there's frustration. And you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that's where it shows up in my life. So.
Yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability.
Yeah,
How
no
about for you,
problem.
Mick?
Yeah, I think kind of along the same lines as Chris. Like, there's comfort in money for me. Like, it doesn't have to be a ton,
Right.
But I want that. When we look at our bank account, there's a safety buffer that we both like to look at and say that to us feels safe. And then anytime that we're not there, then it creates tension, not just among us, but even among ourselves. Like, you start thinking about cutbacks. You start looking at your budget. You're like, what is it that's going to need to change now because things are not what they used to be. And I think some of that time and that tension is when we feel a little bit uneasy, unhappy, however you want to define it. But then you start looking around at other people because you feel that tension in your own life. You start looking and you're like, well, how can they? You know, you maybe even look at your own job, your own finances, and you're like, well, how can they afford this and I'm struggling now, or how can they afford this and I'm struggling now? And so it helps feed into the lie. And then also, as I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, the thousands of things that are pouring into my life every day that I'm seeing as needs now. Like, I didn't once acknowledge that as a need, but now that I've seen whatever, it can be a thing that holds a scrubber in my sink, and all of a sudden I need that. I didn't know that I did. And I haven't needed it for 40 years, but all of a sudden I do need it now because I see it. I see the value in it. And so all of a sudden that's something that moves up on the priority list, and I start creating a lot of that tension and a lot of that unhappiness on myself, because I'm like, now that's a need, that's a desire that I can't have filled.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think that when I was preparing for our conversation today, a song that Mick and I are familiar with, Buy Me a Boat, it's a country song by Chris Jansen, came up, and it talks about how money can't buy happiness, but money can buy you all these things that basically bring happiness. But it's interesting because the line is like, something about buy me a boat, but then he needs a truck to pull it. And I feel like that is the like chicken or the egg, almost like you want one thing, but then you need more things to like support the one thing. And I think that our culture and our society sell us so much every day. Like you talked about, you have a marketing degree. Like I just feel like the marketers in our world in America right now are doing a great job, because I am told so many times a day I need this thing. And we could get caught up in it if we don't have the right perspective. Yeah.
I think about all the hobbies that I've had and all the different ways that I've found something that is supposed to be leisure and supposed to be fun. It always comes with a price tag with it. You know what I mean? And like, I get it in my head, like to be this, I have to have this. And you know, you got to look the part. You got to have the right equipment to do that. And it snowballs really, really fast, like you said.
It does. You know, verse 12, to close out that passage we just read, says that people who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much, but the rich seldom get a good night's sleep. Really, for either of you, what message do you think this one verse is trying to convey? What is the lesson we see here?
I was just going to say, like, I think... what I thought about here was the idea of somebody who hit the lottery. Like the way when he described it and he lays this out, like how often my parents played the lottery all growing up, and the hope was inordinate wealth immediately without and that would fix all the problems. And I think what he gets to, or what we see with the lottery side of things, is that brings more heartache and more difficulty than it does freedom and contentment, and the ability to work hard, have what you need, and just kind of be content in life. That is the path to true joy and to freedom. The ability to sleep at night, because the rich is up thinking about his money and how he can make more and how he cannot lose.
For sure.
Yeah, I put contentment in that as well. I feel like contentment allows our mind to rest. I was thinking about, for me, I'm a very task-oriented person, and I'm not big on writing anything down. I never feel that need. But I'm constantly sorting out things in my mind. So my mind is busy all the time, prioritizing what's next. And by doing that, I feel like I can stay on top of things. But as I was going back, I'll do that with a project. Right now we've got a small project going on at our house, and I've got everything kind of laid out in my mind when things need to be done. And when those things are not done, or I feel like I've underachieved, then I have a hard time resting. I'm like, okay, so now if I do this, this, and this, then I'll be back on track. And as I was thinking about money, that continual drive to try to have more creates a busy mind.
Sure.
You're always thinking about what's next. What's my best way to try to achieve this next thing to get me another dollar? Who do I need to cut? What do I need to do? You're constantly going through that in your mind. And so a busy mind is when I can't rest. And normally that's when I'm discontent with where I'm at with something. It can even be in a relationship. If there's any type of tension there, and even in a relationship, that can make it to where I don't sleep well. So, and Molly would probably say I sleep well all the time. I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime. But I think about that as far as contentment. The times that I don't sleep is when I'm not content. So driving that whole thing back to if we can be okay with where we're at, with where God's placed us at that specific time, then that's when we're going to find true rest.
That's really good.
Yeah, that is really good. We're going to go on to our next section. We're going to pick up in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 13. There is another serious problem I have seen under the sun. Hoarding riches harms the saver. Money is put into risky investments that turn sour, and everything is lost. In the end, there is nothing left to pass on to one's children. We all come to the end of our lives as naked and empty-handed as on the day we were born. We can't take our riches with us. And this, too, is a very serious problem. People leave this world no better off than when they came. All their hard work is for nothing, like working for the wind. Throughout their lives, they live under a cloud, frustrated, discouraged, and angry. Even so, I have noticed one thing, at least, that is good. It is good for people to eat, drink, and enjoy their work under the sun during the short life God has given them, and to accept their lot in life. And it is a good thing to receive wealth from God, and the good health to enjoy it. To enjoy your work and accept your lot in life. This is indeed a gift from God. God keeps such people so busy enjoying life that they take no time to brood over the past. Mick, I really feel like this passage kind of follows up what you said and starts to really enter into this idea of contentment that we'll expand on in our conversation. But in verse 13, my question when I read that one is, how does hoarding riches harm the saver? I think that concept can look on a surface level maybe good, or you could justify why it could be good. But Chris, what would you say is the reason, and how does hoarding riches harm the saver?
I do think it stems back to even what you said earlier, Mick, contentment, the idea of if we are going to hoard, it comes back to, again, just this call to continue to build, to continue to hold on. Now I've got to protect it. Now I've got to manage it. Now I've got to, and it creates all this heartache and all this trouble to really manage the wealth that you have. You know what I mean? And so, hoarding it does not bring peace. The way that even as I admitted earlier, that you feel like it might, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So you feel like the bank account's full. I got to keep it that way, and then I'll be content and comfortable. Now I'm working harder to fill something that, you know what I'm saying? So you get the whole concept, but I really think that it hurts us and stretches us when we don't realize that it is lost in the end. Like, and that's the key to this passage that really sticks out to me, is that the whole idea of we can save it for as long as we want, our entire lives, but we're going to pass it off to somebody else, and we're not going to take it with us, and we're going to have this. We're going to leave the world in the same way that we came into the world, with the skin on our bodies. You know what I mean? And so, and I think that is a sobering truth for why do we put the effort that we do into securing wealth. You know what I'm saying? So that's my thought.
Yeah, kind of along those same lines. I was thinking about the messages that we've just heard concerning our wealth and what we're doing with it, and kind of going back to the idea that all of that is God's. Like, we're stewards of it. And I think anytime, actually we went through the parable talking about the 3 servants that were given the talents, and how the one went and buried it. Like, he just went and basically put it into safekeeping, and we see that God wasn't honored by that, or the master wasn't honored by that. And like, kind of going back to that, I think when we hoard things for ourselves, like when we're not open-handed with what God has for us, that's very super stressful time on our life, and it actually damages us. It causes discontentment, unhappiness, a lot of the things that stem from us not using and being wise stewards of what God's given us. He's given us our time. He's given us our money. And I don't believe, and there may be a passage that would prove me otherwise, but I don't see a whole lot of places where God says to go and pack those things away and don't use them with the kingdom focus. I think as He blesses us with riches, He's calling us to bless other people, to be a blessing in some way. And now, you know, there's a bigger conversation I'm sure that could happen, and we could spend hours talking about like how you should spend it and what is too much. But I think ultimately you've got to be in tune with God on that. But I think as He gives you resources, as He blesses you, He's going to ask you to be a blessing back to other people. That may mean selling everything and giving it to the poor. It may mean that you are going to have more and you're going to be able to bless people in other ways. I actually know of people that have told me like they were blessed with a nice house, but they're very generous with that space. Like they will allow that to be a ministry tool that God uses. Like they volunteered that space for different things. I'm like that seems to have a kingdom focus. And I think rather than packing that money away where someday it's just gonna all fade away and be gone, if we're looking at everything as like we're merely just a steward of what God's given us, and we have the opportunity to be a blessing with that and to further the kingdom, then that's the focus that I think that He's wanting out of these verses.
Yeah, as we're talking about this, I kind of got this image of like when you have something of value, and let's pretend that it can fit in our hands. So a resource, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your reputation, maybe it's a dream or a career. And when you hold it so tight, that is the only thing you're thinking about. That is what is driving all of your decisions. Whereas instead, all the things I listed can be so good and God-given. If we hold them with an open hand, and release them in a way, like we can trust that God is going to use it for His kingdom, as you guys pointed out. And I think that it harms us when we squeeze things so tightly because we put our hope and our worth and the value and our trust, our faith in that one thing to fulfill us, because it's all we can feel, it's all we can see, it's all we can think about, instead of releasing it and saying, no, these are good things and they're from God, but let's use them how God wants us to use them.
Yeah, I really think like fear comes into that. Like I think we grasp at things because there is this underlying fear that like I know I'm limited. I know the work that I had to do to get what I have. Right. And so like fear goes, I can't let that go because I don't have the energy and resources to get it again. And I can't guarantee that I'll have it again. When we're tapped into God and when we're trusting God and we hold it with that open hand, what we're doing is we're going, I don't have to worry about this. The one who put it in my hand in the first place is the one who can bring it back to my hand, is the one who can take me beyond that. You know what I mean? Or make me content with something else. And so like, it's that if we are the source ourselves for our wealth, if we're the source ourselves for our contentment, for these things that that the author of Ecclesiastes is talking about, like it's futile and it goes away, and we're gonna constantly worry. But if God is that source, then it changes everything.
For sure. So then from this passage, what is the relationship we should have with work, Mick? What is it that we see is the healthier way?
Yeah, as I was processing this one was a tough one for me. I felt like this kind of went full circle with part of my testimony of why I'm even here today. I think that work in general, it all has to operate within the parameters of our calling. Yes, it is a means to an end. Like it is going to be something that you have to provide for your family. I actually went for an interview once. It's kind of funny. I went in for the interview, and we went through. It was a great interview. The guy offered me the job, and I was like, before we go any further, I was like, I would like to talk about money. And he's like, oh, money's not important. I'm like, it kind of is. I've got 2 kids and a wife. It kind of is a thing, but kind of wanted to push that on the back. And I was like, there's got to be a way that this provides. And then, I mean, ultimately it wasn't something that I was interested in anyhow. But as I was thinking about this in my own life, like I've had jobs. I've even had what some people are working as careers, and for them, that's what they're called to do. And that's great. But I think ultimately our work has to be something that operates within the parameters of our calling. Like it has to be something that we know, a place that God has placed us in, and then we're not just out trying to pursue our own. Something that they had told me in school, in college. Maybe I was getting more bad there than good. I don't know. But one thing that they told me is, if you had stayed in a career the same job, the same company for more than 3 years, that you are underselling yourself. Like you had the opportunity to go somewhere else, and somewhere else is going to find value in your last 3 years of experience and be willing to pay you more to do the same exact thing. And that was interesting. Is that like a young guy going through business? I was like, that sounds great. You know,
Yeah.
I'll go
every 3 years.
Every
I get a
3 years
raise.
I get a big raise.
Yeah.
I just need to go talk to a different company, and that's what I'm going to do. But as I was now, obviously, looking at it in a completely different realm of like, what is the calling that God's placed on my life? What is it that He's asked me to do? And even within a job, like whether you're working in a factory, whether you're working in a church, I think that the calling can still be there. And as long as you're operating within the parameters, that's where you're going to find happiness. The other places, if you're just out pursuing wealth, I think that it'll continue to be a struggle.
For sure. Chris, would you add anything to that?
I would just say, like, I think the calling is important. I think you nailed that. I think it's important to understand that God gives us a desire to be used. And I don't mean like abused. I mean like to have purpose in our lives. And so like living out of this place where like we are called to work, we are called to put our hands to something and our minds to something and to produce, but always coming back to really what you said, Mick, like that idea of, man, God has allowed me to enter into this. And so it's not, my value and my worth is not found in that, but I sure do get a heck of a lot of joy from the fact that God allows me to participate in this. And even those places, like you said, factory workers and all these different places where people spend the majority of their lives, God still does amazing things through that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like a calling maybe in the same way that you did with coming here, you know what I mean? But it's still a calling. There's still people around you that need to hear the gospel, that need generosity, that need the love of Christ. And there's still, you know what I mean? Like there's still, God has purpose for you, even though you're plunking widgets on an assembly line somewhere.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I even know some people that God's blessed them with careers that have been super lucrative, like whether they own their own business or they've been promoted in business, but their heart is so generous. I actually was talking to somebody about that. I was like, because we were talking about calling and how you're being used, and I was like, sometimes God his calling for you might be that you make a lot of money so that you can bless a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Like that is potentially a thing. I was like, so never doubt what you're doing if you know that that's where God has you. Don't start doubting that calling just because you're looking at somebody else and saying, well, I'm not in ministry and I don't feel like I'm making a huge impact on a day-to-day basis because I'm not interacting with a lot of people. I said, never doubt if you know what God's calling you into. If that's to make a lot of money so that you can bless a lot of people or so that you can be a bigger influence in some area, I
100%.
said never doubt that. So
Yeah.
That's good. Guys, before we go on to chapter 6, is there any final thoughts you have on our closing out of chapter 5? You feel good about it?
No, I think we covered a good bit of it. So
Great. Let's go on to chapter 6. Starting in verse 1. There is another serious tragedy I've seen under the sun, and it weighs heavily on humanity. God gives some people great wealth and honor and everything they could ever want, but then he doesn't give them the chance to enjoy these things. They die, and someone else, even a stranger, ends up enjoying their wealth. This is meaningless, a sickening tragedy. A man might have 100 children and live to be very old, but if he finds no satisfaction in life and doesn't even get a decent burial, it would have been better for him to be born dead. His birth would have been meaningless, and he would have ended in darkness. He wouldn't even have had a name, and he would never have seen the sun or known of its existence. Yet he would have had more peace than in growing up to be an unhappy man. He might live 1,000 years twice over, but still not find contentment. And since he must die like everyone else, well, what's the use? All people spend their lives scratching for food, but they never seem to have enough. So are wise people really better off than fools? Do poor people gain anything by being wise and knowing how to act in front of others? Enjoy what you have rather than desiring what you don't have. Just dreaming about nice things is meaningless, like chasing the wind. This section starts out by acknowledging the tension that God gives some people great wealth and honor and everything they could ever want, as the passage states, but then they don't get the chance to enjoy these things because they die, and others end up with their wealth. And I know that, like,
sounds like Eeyore was the author of this.
Yeah, like I'm kind
Super
of
positive.
chuckling because it does sound like such a downer, but I know that this text of wisdom, like, we can learn so much, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And Chris, I would just say, like, with that start, like, what do we learn from that? What do we take from that?
It goes back. I really do think, like, he is laying out this idea, this of just continually bringing back, and the word that he's used throughout the whole thing is we say it meaningless. We can say it however you want, but the idea of profitlessness. He's painting this picture that it does not matter to what degrees or what efforts we go to attain wealth, to keep wealth, to build wealth. In the end, those things will dissipate, and they will go away, and we will all find ourselves in the same place as the people before us. And so, that is a Debbie Downer, like that's a like Downer thought process, but it's also the reality. And I think we have cemeteries full of testimonies to that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and some people, they leave it to their family, and they end up with these beautiful buildings on top of their grave. But guess what? Who enjoys that? It's not the person in the ground. You know what I mean? Like, it's, and I don't mean to speak crassly about it, about people who have passed. You know what I mean? But it's this idea that, like, this is the reality of the world we live in, and there is a way to freedom. There is a way to life. There is a way to finding joy in what looks like this meaningless cycle. And so we learn from this by going, oh yeah, all that effort I put into this, all of that, the striving that I go after to have these things, all the time I spend on Amazon scrolling through the things that I want next, like, that's not going to lead to anything of real life or fruit in the end of my life.
Sure. Mick, would you add anything to that?
No, I think Chris covered it pretty well. It seems to just be like running down a list of things, and like all of the things that we can try to obtain, if we're not content in those things that God's given us, or if we try to hold on to them in some way, kind of like going back to chapter 5, like when we try to hold on to the things that God's blessed us with, I think that is where discontentment's found. That's when unhappiness is found. And ultimately that's kind of like Chris said, you can pass things on to other people. I've heard that saying that, like, your great grandchildren won't even know your name. Like your legacy, the only thing that you're really going to pass on is what you've done for the kingdom, like how your kids are gonna grow up because of the example that you've led. Those are going to be the true things that matter. Like you said, building a big house on a grave is what it feels like. You're leaving it for somebody else to do something with.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say to what you said, Mick, like the whole idea of leaving it even to kids, like even thinking beyond that, like with what you said earlier, when we live kingdom minded and we're not just leaving a legacy for our families, where some people would even come back and push back on that and say, well, no, when you attain wealth, you're leaving it and you're impacting your family in the future because you now have an inheritance or whatnot. And the whole idea behind it is what you said earlier. Like when we are investing those things in the kingdom of God now, we're not just building a legacy in our family, but we're building a legacy all across the world. And we're part of this thing that God is doing in redeeming people to himself. You know what I mean? And so we might get to heaven one day and more than just what we left to our families, we're gonna see how our lives played a role in all of these people's lives, that they now know the Lord, that they now experience life because of what God allowed us to invest our stuff and our lives into.
It really is a sobering passage, and I think, to me, one of the points is like time erases all of us at some point. Like we get erased. But it is about the legacy that we leave, whether it's with our actual resources, but more so maybe how we teach people the proper view of our resources sometimes. And I think that this passage really goes into a little bit of a lot of what we have been talking about a little bit in terms of contentment. Mick, what do you feel like the keys to contentment are? Like, how do we grasp that?
I think that it takes discipline. I think that it's only going to be obtained through, I think the point that Pastor Matthew made a couple weeks ago was that it happens through physical and spiritual behavior. Like you have to seek God first in everything. And then again, it's like a paradigm shift to realize that what we have, we're only stewarding. When you can finally knock that around all of your resources, like if you can wrap everything up in that, I think that is when you're going to find true contentment. But it's going to take a continual reminding of yourself of that fact, like that what I have is not mine. What I have is not mine. What I have is not mine. I think unless if you keep driving that home, and then you, like I said, I think your spiritual walk is super, super, super important. The most important thing in this, that you keep your spiritual walk in check. But then I do think it takes those physical reminders of like going back to those things and saying, what I have is not mine. Because the second that we start holding on to our things, that's when discontentment happens. Whether that is our time. If we say, you know what, I think it was maybe even Chris that mentioned this last week in his message about the second that we start like holding on to things as though they're ours and thinking that we know better what to do with our things than what God does. He specifically was addressing pride in that. But as I was thinking about that, I was like, that's where discontentment for me is found, when I start grasping those things and saying, all right, now I know what to do with this. I know what to do with my money. I know what to do with my time. I know what to do with my house. I know what to do with my kids.
Yeah.
The second that I start taking ownership of those things is when I quickly become discontented with the results of what's happening, because I've taken those out of God's hands. And I've said, I know what's better with it than I know what's better to do with this stuff than you do. And so that's when, in my own life, that I've found discontentment popping up, is when I take possession of my resources.
I think for me, like I see this in my daughter, my youngest. She has discovered the Amazon app, and why I let her on the Amazon app, I don't know, but she loves just scrolling through. But like what it's done is like it creates this constant, hey, I think I need this. Like this would be really cool to have. Like, and what it does is it puts before her this constant message of what it takes to satisfy my heart is something new, something more, something beyond what I have, and that message is constantly in front of her. Well, as adults, we are ingesting that message constantly in front of us as well. If I have this, then I'll be content. If I have this, then I'll be happy. I didn't know, you said it earlier, I didn't know I needed this scrubber for the last 40 years, but I scrolled across on Amazon, and that looks super, like it's going to help my life a ton. You know what I mean? So now it's a thing that I need. And so our society in the world in which we live keeps these messages in front of us constantly. What you have is not enough. You need more. And so like we have to be purposed in pursuing the spiritual disciplines, like you said, but also be purposed to know when to shut off those messages to our lives, and having time and space to really stop and think, not just buy things impulsively because that's what I feel like in a moment, or that's because I scrolled past, but taking time to stop and think about the purchases we make, shutting off the influx of, hey, you'd be better, your life would be better if you had this. You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, that's good. And I think really, as I was reading this last passage through several times, I was really trying to figure out what is the practical advice we can take. And I want to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But to your last 2 points, I mean, I think in verse 9, dreaming about nice things is meaningless. I think we have to be so careful about what we allow our mind to focus on, like what we are consuming, what we are thinking about. Because, I went shopping. My husband's birthday is today. I went shopping for him earlier this week. I have thought about this purple sweatshirt that I saw at Dick's Sporting Goods multiple times. And I'm like, why am I thinking about this purple sweatshirt? It's not actually going to make my life better. But I think sometimes we play the victim card in that. Like, I just think about what I think about.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot more wisdom in trying to take our thoughts actually captive. And sure, to some degree, I would say we don't have control in what we think about, but we can at least take that thought captive, evaluate it, and decide what to do with it. I was just going to say, like I have done in the past, and I do this I try to do this on a regular basis. I will hit a season where I would just say, like, I'm not buying anything through this season. And now, does that stop the messages from coming? No. You know what I mean? I still see things like on advertisements that I want, walk through a store, and I might see something I feel like I need. But having that time frame in place where I go, this is a no spending time for me. You know what I mean? Like, it just creates that structure, those systems around exactly what you said, taking thoughts captive and being able to think through and process through, do I really need this? Can I be content without it? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. Yep. I don't like it, but yes.
It's crazy during those times, though, how quickly, like, you 100%. Immediately will, as soon as you talk about budgets, you immediately want to spend money. We sometimes do this thing in our house. I don't even know who come up with it, but, like, eventually we'll do, like, we're not going to buy any more groceries until we empty out the pantry.
Yes.
The second that we start that, I want a pizza so bad. Like, yes. I immediately want something that we don't have. Like, I don't want pancakes that night. I want a pizza or whatever. But I think about that as I was thinking about that passage, I was like, man, as soon as I put restraint on myself, immediately that's what I'm going to cut sugar. Immediately I want sugar. Like, that's how quickly we go to discontentment when we're in those times of, like, we know that we need to cut back on something.
I think that's what Paul goes to when he's talking about in Romans, where he's like the law's great. He's like, but the second you're told not to do something, guess what you want to do? Yeah, it's that thing.
Yes, I think as people, as humans, we don't like being told no. We don't like limitations, and so as soon as we, even if it's self-imposed, say we're not going to do this or we're not going to have that. I mean, it is within our human nature to just automatically somewhat fixate on it and desire that. Because whoever or ourselves said no to something. As we, before we move on to the last passage, are there any other thoughts from you guys on keys to contentment or practical advice that we can take from this last piece of scripture?
I don't think so. Not for me.
Yeah.
Great. I think, as I was thinking about it, I am so appreciative that several times contentment is addressed in scripture, because again, I think that is a true ingrained in us human nature conflict from thousands of years ago. And I think that it is what you guys have both said, and Mick, I appreciate the spiritual and the behavioral, it's both spiritual and action steps. And I think that there are spiritual and action steps in so much of our faith in our faith journey. But I do think it's keeping things in proper perspective. I think it's accepting that so many things are a vapor, are going to come and go quite quickly. And I think it's even accepting the gifts of God, the good things of it, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, with all of that, we have to trust God. We have to fear him, and we have to keep his commands. And again, I think in all those things, there are both spiritual elements and there are actionable steps that we can take. And ultimately, I hope that for us as followers of Jesus, we want to be people who live honestly and live with integrity, even when we are thinking through and processing the questions and the tensions that even these passages we're in today bring out. So let's close out our passage for today. We're going to pick up in chapter 6, verse 10. And it says this: everything has already been decided. It was known long ago what each person would be. So there's no use arguing with God about your destiny. The more words you speak, the less they mean. So what good are they? In the few days of our meaningless lives, who knows how our days can be spent? Our lives are like a shadow. Who can tell what will happen on this earth after we are gone? So these are just the last few verses in our section for today. But I do feel like they pack a punch. And so really verse 10 is funny because I think even Mick and I briefly talked about this earlier in the day, that translation to translation, you can pick up on different things. But I just read from the NLT, and I feel like verse 10 raises this deep, maybe even hot topic theological question of like the predestination and like, what does it mean that everything has already been decided? So Chris, I'm going to kick this to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Mick.
I like where we headed with that.
I just feel like that, and I don't know that is the topic this verse is getting at, but I do feel like that is in concept anyways, what we wrestle with when we read it. And again, maybe it depends on your version and the wording, but
yeah. I would love to look up and see how maybe it's been translated in some other verses or whatnot. But as I look at it and I think about it, and please forgive me, I'm pulling this kind of off of the cusp of my brain. So
sure.
and thousands of years of history has tried to explain these ideas. And so where he's kind of headed in this, and like thinking along the lines of the Ecclesiastes thinker, you really get this sense of an understanding that God is in control and he's sovereign, you know what I mean? But at the same time, that there is a cycle to life. And so everything that has happened has already happened. So he mentions that already earlier on in the book. He says everything that has already been, has already been and will be again. So you get this cyclical idea. And so is he being deterministic and saying like everything is predestined out? I don't know. Like he's at least saying that we're not experiencing anything new under the sun, and that the God of the universe is sovereign over the world and he's sovereign over our lives. And so we have to take into account the fact that God is in control.
Yep. And
so like there's that aspect of it. To speak to the predestination side of things, I believe that Scripture teaches I believe that Scripture leaves this as a tension. Mm-hmm. Scripture will always testify to God's sovereignty and that God is the King of the universe, Creator God. Nobody can thwart his plans. Nobody can oversee that. I also believe that Scripture teaches that we are to enter into the process of living our lives in a way that does not know the future, that does not have this determination set out before them. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so we are left to make choices, and I'm going to use the term free will choices.
Sure.
To walk with God, to relate with God, and to experience this world. I believe Scripture teaches both. Yep. So that is logically, it's logically impossible to be both. But I don't believe that God oftentimes operates out of that way. I believe that there are logical conclusions you can come to. I do believe it's a paradox where we are meant to experience reality not as God experiences reality. God can know from front to back, start to finish. I've heard people say, like, no, God is living in the constant now, so every moment is now for God. You know what I mean? So it's not that he knows the future, it's just that time is not his constraint. And so those are great thought processes, you know what I mean? But we don't ultimately know for sure. What we know is what Scripture teaches us, is that we can trust God with our lives, that he has purpose for us, he loves us, and he has the power and ability to influence our lives when we invite him into those things. We also know that he's shaping history, you know what I mean? And so we see how his hand has moved over history. But to us, as we live it every single day, we don't have that information. We just have to trust that God is in control, and we have to make decisions based on that trust.
That's great.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. I think that when we have the tensions that accompany faith, like there just are tensions that accompany faith, and when we have those, I think your words were so encouraging to me that we have to go back to doctrine, that we have to go back to what we know of God to be, even in the midst of confusion, even in the midst of our questions, and that is, he is trustworthy, he loves us, and he is with us. He has a plan, he is sovereign, even when things are confusing to us, even when Scripture is confusing to us, we can go back to seeing to his character and to who he has been and is and will always be. Yeah. And so I appreciate your wisdom in that and pointing us to that, because we don't get the answers we want right now. Yeah. For everything. Nope. Okay, verse 11, the more words you speak, the less they mean, which is just so good. And I love the simplicity of it. But how do we make sure the words we speak matter, Mick?
I think the passage kind of even starting from the beginning of that is talking about anything that we're speaking outside of God. Because at first I read that passage and I was like, wow, this is my life is worthless, I'm gonna go eat worms kind of thing. It didn't feel very, very encouraging. And even the first verse there when we had already addressed, or Chris addressed that about predestiny, it makes it feel like, well, what am I doing? Everything I'm doing is worthless anyhow. But I feel like the passage is directly talking about anything that we're doing outside of God is meaningless. If we're trying to build, kind of to reference the verses before, if we're trying to build our own legacy, if we're trying to pursue our own dreams, any of those things that we're doing outside of God's will and outside of God's plan, those things are meaningless. The words we speak, the resources that we acquire. I know when we say wealth, immediately in my mind, I always go to money, and I realize that wealth can be a multitude of things. It could, you could have a wealth of time on your hands. So wealth could be measured differently. But I think as he's addressing these things, and then specifically in the end here about words, talking about how words outside of God too, if you just go around saying things, they can be meaningless without the actions, without the love to back them. And so I think that as I'm reading this, at least for me at this time, as I was reading that, what I was pulling out of that is anything that I'm doing outside of God's will is going to be meaningless. It's not going to have any added value to me at the end of my life, and only the things that I'm doing for God is what's building my legacy. That's what's building my wealth, is what I'm doing for the kingdom.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. Chris, you want to add anything about the words we speak?
I would just say, the thought, as Mick was talking, what I was thinking about was this idea of, a lot of times, it's the idea of diluting. So, if we put a drop of dye into a bottle of water, it saturates it. You know what I mean? And you start to see the color. You drop a drop of food coloring in a swimming pool, it's something else. You know what I mean? You might even not even be able to have it be perceptive. You know what I mean? So this idea of if we're just people of always speaking words, the things that really matter can just be diluted, and we can lose track on what's really important and really valuable. Also, I think along the lines of if you think about he wants people to not. He's thinking about the things that are meaningless. We speak a lot of words to impress people, to show them that we're smart. I realize as I'm saying this, I'm saying a lot of words right now, and so like I maybe need to be quiet, so let my words be few. But like we get to this place where, like, man, if I could just impress people, if I could just convince people, if I could just get them to do so that I can gain something, like, I think that's where he goes. That's meaningless. Like, words won't get you what you're looking for. Same way that money won't, and
sure.
and all those other things.
Yeah, I think that we should check our motives with the words we say, and I think that we should, everything, test it against Scripture. Is this giving life? Is this building other people up? Or is this got a negative meaning, negative heart, negative motivation behind it? Verse 12 can be pretty sobering, and it's the last one of the day. And it says, in the few days of our meaningless lives, who knows how our days can best be spent? Our lives are like a shadow. Who can tell what will happen on this earth after we are gone? So to wrap up our conversation from the day, in light of the passage that we have read, how does this verse encourage you to live your life, Chris?
I'm going to steal the words of Mick and just say dependent on God.
Yeah.
Like, if we live outside of that, it's going to be, the entire passage is about, like, this is vapor, this is meaningless, unless we find this place where we're able to live freely and contently in the things that God gives us. Money's a good thing. Time, words, all of these things that he lists, that he says are meaningless, they're good things that God gives us as gifts. But if we view them for anything other than that, if we take them for anything other and try to strangle them and hold them for other than that, I think we miss the point of why God gives them, and we miss the joy in being a part of what God's doing in them.
Yeah. I think a lot of what I was trying to say, and I don't know whether it come off clear or not, but like the way that we attach ourselves to the things that we've been given, the amount of stock that we put into those things. I'm not reading this verse thinking like that you can't have that purple sweater. Like, if God has blessed you with the funds, and there's no reason that's holding you back from anything, there's no reason that you can't have that purple sweater. I don't think that's what this passage is saying. But I do think, even as you addressed in the country song, like, about like one thing leading to another, if you allow that discontentment into your heart to where those things become the focus, you're attaching who you are to those things. I think that's when we really find ourselves in trouble. Like he talks about words, he talks about our wealth, he's talking about multiple things that make up who we are. And he's saying anytime that we attach ourselves to those things, that's where we're finding our value in our life, is in those things. That's what we're pursuing. We can't think of anything else. We're not loving others well. We're not doing these things. I think that's where kind of like he wrapped up that verse. Let's see. In the few days of our meaningless lives, who knows how the days can be best spent. So as I was thinking about those passages, I was like, man, what am I attaching myself to? What am I attaching my life to? And what does my life look like because of that? And I think that only the things that we're doing for God are what really matter. There's going to be blessings that you're going to get along the way. Maybe somebody will gift you a Baby Ruth and a purple sweater. I don't know. But God has ways of blessing us with things that we desire. But along with that's how we attach ourselves to those things that we have.
That's so good. That's a really great closing thought. Mick and Chris, thank you guys for being here. Thanks
Always
for having
welcome.
This conversation. I so appreciated it. It really, truly gave me things to think about and blessed me. And I appreciate both of you and your perspectives. We thank you guys for joining us, for listening in, and we hope that this blessed you as well. And if it did, we would love for you to share it with someone else. We'd love for you to rate it, to subscribe, and really to listen next week. And if you are able, we would love to see you at the Tree Church here in Lancaster, Ohio on Sunday mornings at 9 or 11 a.m.